In a deadly Montana blizzard, veteran Mac Wetherby kept collecting abandoned scrap, the only work that still gave him peace. On a frozen road, a young woman and her wounded German shepherd collapsed while searching for shelter. Mac found Willa and Rook clinging to each other for warmth as the storm closed around them. He brought them home, unaware that they were escaping a stepmother's cruelty and control. When he saw their injuries, Mac realized the storm was not the worst danger they had survived. To protect Willa, he would face a battle harder than war, helping her without taking away her freedom. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, then like the video and subscribe. By late afternoon, the old lake house had begun to sound empty. Not quiet, empty. There was a difference, and Malcolm Wetherby had spent enough years living alone to recognize it. Quiet was snow settling against a window. Quiet was a dog breathing beside a cold stove, or a woman reading in the next room while pretending not to watch whether her husband had fallen asleep. Empty was what remained after the photographs came down and the drawers had been pulled open. It was the pale rectangle on a wall where a painting had hung for 40 years. It was the single coffee cup left in a cupboard because no heir had thought it worth wrapping. Mac stood in the kitchen of the abandoned house near Water Lake, one gloved hand resting on the counter. Outside, snow moved through the pines in long white sheets. "You planning to marry the place?" Lenny Brackett called from the hallway. "Or can I go home before my truck becomes an archaeological discovery?" Mac looked toward the doorway. At 63, Lenny had the broad middle and sturdy arms of a man who had spent most of his life carrying lumber while insisting he preferred supervision. A thick gray-blonde mustache covered much of his upper lip, and the mustard-colored knit cap on his head leaned so far to one side that it seemed to have given up on discipline. He held an old wooden folding ruler in one hand, though there was nothing left to measure. "You've been supervising for 6 hours," Mac said. "Exactly. Exhausting work." Mac glanced once more around the kitchen. The former owner had died in autumn. Her relatives lived in 3 different states and had hired Wetherby Salvage and Clear-Out to empty the house before it went on the market. By noon, the useful furniture had been collected. By 3, the boxes meant for donation were gone. What remained were the things no one wanted badly enough to remember. Mac had selected several lengths of copper pipe, a crate of rusted hand tools, 2 metal bed frames, and an old generator with a cracked fuel line. The generator might be salvageable. Most things were, if a person understood the difference between ruined and neglected. Lenny lowered his voice. "Storm's coming faster." "I know. You said that 20 minutes ago." "I knew it then, too." Lenny studied him. There were few people in Clearhaven who could look at Mac long enough to notice what he was not saying. Lenny had earned the privilege by refusing to be intimidated for nearly 30 years. Mac's olive-green military jacket was whitened at the shoulders by dust and stray snow. The cloth patch over his left chest read U.S. Veteran, its letters softened by years of weather. An American flag was stitched to the right sleeve. Beneath the jacket, his frame remained solid, but age had pulled his shoulders slightly downward and stiffened the way he turned his back. Lenny knew Mac's pauses better than most people knew speeches. "You don't have to stay until the house forgets who lived here," he said. Mac's jaw tightened. "Window in the upstairs room is broken. We covered it. Plastic's loose. It'll survive until morning." Mac picked up the staple gun. Lenny sighed. "Your funeral. Not tonight. That is not as comforting as you think." Lenny left 10 minutes later, his taillights disappearing into the thickening snow. Mac watched from the porch until the red glow vanished among the trees. Then the house belonged to him. He climbed the narrow stairs, fixed the plastic over the broken window, and checked every latch twice. By the time he returned outside, darkness had begun to settle over Water Lake. The water itself had disappeared behind the trees, but Mac could hear the wind crossing its frozen surface like a distant train. He secured the salvaged metal beneath a tarp in the small trailer hitched to his old 4-wheel drive pickup. His fingers had started to ache inside his gloves. The curved scar across the back of his right hand looked pale when he pulled the glove off to tighten a stubborn knot. Snow collected in his short silver-white hair. He should have left with Lenny. The sensible part of him knew that. The other part, the older, quieter part, had simply not wanted to reach home before the darkness did. At the house, there would be one plate in the cabinet, one coat by the door, and one side of the bed whose sheets had not been disturbed in years. There would be Jasper's collar inside the ammunition box beneath the workbench. There would be no one to ask why Mac had stayed out too long. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. The heater coughed out cold air. "Take your time," Mac muttered. "No emergency." The heater responded with a rattle that sounded vaguely insulting. He pulled onto the forest road just after 5. Within 20 minutes, the painted center line had vanished beneath the snow. Wind pushed powder across the road in low-moving shapes. The headlights illuminated only a short tunnel ahead, white flakes rushing toward the windshield as if the truck were driving upward through a river. Mac kept both hands on the wheel. He did not turn on the radio. There had been years when silence frightened him, then years when noise did. Now he lived somewhere between the two, choosing sounds carefully: the engine, the wipers, the faint knock of metal beneath the trailer tarp. The road narrowed near an old timber bridge. Beyond it, the forest thickened before opening toward Clear Haven. Mac slowed. Something moved in the headlights. At first he thought it was a fallen branch shifting in the wind. Then the shape rose. A German shepherd stood in the middle of the road. Mac braked without slamming his foot down. The trailer shifted behind him, but the truck stopped straight. The dog did not run. It was large-framed and underweight, with a dark charcoal saddle spreading over its back and shoulders. Deep copper-gold fur showed along its chest and legs. One ear stood upright, while the tip of the other folded slightly forward. Snow had gathered along its spine and in the uneven silver beginning to mark the right side of its muzzle. The dog stood at an angle rather than facing the truck directly. Protective positioning. Mac knew it before he saw what the animal was protecting. A young woman emerged from the dark behind it. She wore a thin cloth coat that had soaked almost black at the shoulders. A loose braid of chestnut-brown hair hung over one side of her chest, crusted with snow. One hand held the dog's leash. The other dragged a faded travel bag with a broken zipper, its contents held inside by a length of cord. She took 3 steps. On the 4th, her left knee bent strangely. The shepherd moved back at once, pressing its shoulder against her leg without taking its eyes off the truck. Mac felt something inside his chest tighten, not fear, not memory exactly, but the place where the two had once learned to live together. He put the truck in park. He did not get out. Instead, he lowered the driver's window several inches, letting snow scatter across the door panel. "My name is Malcolm Wetherby," he called. "People around here call me Mac." The woman said nothing. "I live outside Clear Haven, about 9 miles from here." Her fingers tightened around the leash. Mac kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Do you need me to call someone?" "No." Her voice was faint, nearly lost beneath the wind. The shepherd shifted half a step forward. Mac looked at the dog's stance, then at the woman's boots. The leather was dark with water, and one lace had been replaced with a strip of fabric. Her lips had taken on the bluish color of someone whose body was losing the argument with the cold. "You have somewhere to go?" "A friend's." "Where?" She glanced past the truck, toward the white road behind him. "Near town." "What street?" "I don't remember the name." It was not a convincing lie, but it did not sound like a lie intended to deceive him. It sounded like a wall built quickly from whatever materials she could reach. Mac had seen walls like that before. Pressing against them only made frightened people reinforce them. "All right," he said. Her face changed slightly, as if she had expected a challenge and did not know what to do without one. Mac took out his phone. The woman stepped back. The shepherd moved with her, body still angled between them. "I'm calling the county's non-emergency line," Mac said. "I'll give them my name, location, and plate number. You can speak to the deputy yourself." "I didn't ask for police." "No, you didn't." "Then don't call them." Mac looked at the snow falling across her hair and the tremor moving through the dog's rear legs. "You don't have to file a report. You don't have to tell them anything you don't want to tell them. But I'm not putting you in my truck without somebody knowing where you are." For a moment, the only sound was the wind scraping through the pines. The woman looked at him more directly. Mac's nose had been broken once and never set perfectly straight. Deep lines crossed his forehead and ran beside his eyes. He knew how he appeared in the weak dashboard light. An old man in a battered military jacket, alone on a forest road, asking a stranger to trust a system she clearly did not trust. "Trust me" would have been the wrong thing to say, so he did not say it. He placed the call. Deputy Warren Pell answered after the fourth ring. His voice remained steady even through the poor signal. Mac gave the road marker, his plate number, and a brief description of the situation. "The church shelter lost power," Warren said. "We've got trees down on Miller Pass, so nobody's reaching the transition center from your side tonight. Rescue is tied up near Route 12. Mac looked at the woman. "She's an adult," he said, "conscious but cold. Dog's in poor shape." "Can she hear me?" Mac extended the phone through the window. The woman hesitated. The shepherd looked at Mac's bare hand. Its eyes were dark brown, the upper lid slightly heavy, giving the animal an expression that was neither pleading nor aggressive, only watchful. Mac did not move the phone closer. Finally, the woman approached. Up close, she seemed younger than he had first thought, though clearly grown. Freckles crossed the bridge of her nose. Her amber brown eyes moved from Mac to the passenger door, then to the rearview mirror, as if she were already measuring exits. She took the phone without touching his fingers. "This is Deputy Pell," Warren said loudly enough for Mac to hear. "Can you tell me your name?" A long pause followed. "Willa Dane." "And your age, Willa?" 21. "Are you injured?" "No." Mac saw her left hand disappear beneath her right sleeve. Warren asked whether she wanted to report a crime. Willa said no. He asked whether she wished to be taken home. She answered more quickly this time. No. Warren did not ask why. After confirming that Willa agreed to temporary shelter at Mac's house, he told her he would come by in the morning. Willa handed the phone back. Mac ended the call and looked toward the truck. "I'm going to clear the back seat for your dog. You can stay where you are while I do it." "What if I don't get in?" "Then I'll stay parked here and keep the heater running until you decide what comes next." "You'd do that?" "I'd complain about it." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. It was not quite a smile, but it was the first expression on her face that did not come from fear. Mac stepped out slowly. The German shepherd straightened. Its shoulders rose, but it did not bark. Mac opened the rear door, moved a tool bag to the truck bed, and spread an old wool blanket over the seat. He returned to the driver's side without approaching Willa. The shepherd waited for her. Only when Willa touched the seat did it climb inside. Its rear left leg moved stiffly, and Mac noticed a dark patch of dried blood beneath the fur near its ribs. He said nothing yet. Willa sat in the passenger seat with the travel bag clutched against her chest. Mac turned the heater higher. After less than a mile, the trailer began to sway. The storm had covered the road with a slick layer of packed snow. Copper pipes and the old generator shifted beneath the tarp each time the truck crossed a drift. Mac stopped at an abandoned forestry turnout. He got out and examined the hitch. The load was too heavy for the descent ahead. The generator alone might bring enough money to cover fuel and part of the electric bill. The copper had taken hours to remove without damaging the walls. In another life, he might have called those things insignificant. This life was measured differently. Willa watched through the windshield as he unhitched the trailer and locked it beside the turnout marker. Snow was already filling the tire tracks around his boots. When he returned to the cab, she looked past him at the abandoned load. "Won't somebody steal it?" "Not in this weather." "And tomorrow?" "Maybe." "You worked all day for that." Mac pulled his glove back on. "Yes." "Then why leave it?" He looked at the road ahead. "Because metal doesn't freeze to death." Willa lowered her eyes. From the back seat came the faint sound of two worn tags touching as the dog shifted closer to her. "What's his name?" Mac asked. "Rook." The dog lifted its head. Mac nodded once. "Good name." "He belonged to my mother." The words came out before Willa seemed ready for them. She turned toward the window, ending the subject. Mac respected the boundary. They drove on. Every few minutes, Willa checked the side mirror, then the rearview mirror, searching the darkness behind them. When distant headlights appeared at a turn, she stopped breathing until the vehicle passed in the opposite direction. Rook lay with its body pressed against the back of her seat. Although its teeth had begun to chatter from cold, it kept its head raised. Mac thought of Jasper, not the final photograph in the box, not the hospital report he had never finished reading. He remembered instead the weight of a dog leaning against his knee inside a transport aircraft, pretending not to be afraid of the engines. The memory arrived without permission. Mac tightened his fingers around the worn military coin inside his jacket pocket. Its edges rolled beneath his thumb until the road returned fully beneath the headlights. He did not call Rook by the wrong name. The house appeared through the trees 40 minutes later, a low wooden structure with a workshop attached to one side. Snow covered the roof, porch, and the rusted weather vane above the shed. Mac turned on every exterior light before stopping the truck. The porch glowed amber against the snow. Willa stared at it. "Why all the lights?" she asked. "So you can see where every door is." Mac entered first, turned on the kitchen and hallway lamps, then stepped away from the entrance. The house smelled of cedar shavings, old coffee, and the faint iron scent of tools. A pair of boots rested crooked beside the stove. Papers covered one end of the kitchen table. Nothing had been prepared for company because Mac had stopped imagining company years ago. He placed a spare key on the table. Beside it, he set his charged phone and wrote Warren's number on the back of an unopened utility envelope. "The bedroom is upstairs," he said. "Door locks from the inside. Bathroom is across the hall. Backstairs go through the laundry room. You can call Pell, tell me to leave, or lock both doors and keep the key." Willa remained on the threshold. Snow melted from her boots onto the floorboards. Rook stepped inside before she did, but only far enough to stand between Mac and the staircase. It studied the room, the windows, the hallway, and finally Mac. Mac removed his jacket and hung it by the door. Without the heavy coat, he looked smaller and older. His shoulders carried the fatigue of the day, and his left hand trembled once before he closed it around the back of a chair. Willa noticed. Perhaps the old man was dangerous. Perhaps he was lonely. Perhaps both things could exist in the same body. Mac pointed toward the kitchen. "I can heat soup." "I'm not hungry." "Fine. I'll heat soup badly, and you can refuse it again when it's warm." This time, Willa's mouth almost formed a smile. She entered and closed the door behind her. Later, Mac spread a blanket across the couch near the front entrance. Willa took the upstairs bedroom and turned the lock. He heard the click from below and felt something loosen in his chest. A locked door did not always mean rejection. Sometimes it meant a person finally believed the lock belonged to them. Rook remained in the hallway. It did not follow Willa upstairs. It did not lie beside Mac. Instead, the German Shepherd lowered itself across the floor between the staircase and the couch. Its stiff rear leg extended to one side. Its upright ear faced the front door, while the bent one turned toward the room above. From where it rested, Rook could see both of them. Mac lay awake beneath the blanket, listening to the old house adjust to 3 separate patterns of breathing. Outside, snow erased the tire tracks leading to the porch. Inside, no one trusted anyone completely. For that first night, it was enough that none of them had been left alone. Morning came with a brightness so clean, it almost felt unkind. The storm had passed before dawn, leaving the woods around Mac's house buried beneath fresh snow. Sunlight spilled across the clearing and broke into sharp white flashes on the frozen branches. Every surface looked renewed. Inside the house, nothing felt new. Mac woke on the couch with a cramp in his neck and one boot still on. For several seconds, he did not remember why a German Shepherd was lying across the hallway. Then Rook opened one dark eye. The dog had not moved far during the night. Its body still formed a quiet barrier between the staircase and the front door, but exhaustion had softened its vigilance. The upright ear faced Mac. The bent one tilted toward the room above. Mac sat up slowly, the military coin in his jacket pocket pressed against his ribs. He had slept with the coat folded beneath his head rather than hanging it by the door. Old habits did not always explain themselves. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Rook raised its head at once. Willa appeared at the top of the stairs wearing the same clothes as the night before. Her chestnut braid had mostly come undone, and the damp coat was draped over one arm. Without the snow and darkness around her, she looked less mysterious and more tired. There were pale shadows beneath her amber-brown eyes. She stopped when she saw Mac awake. "Bathroom worked," she said. "That's encouraging." The hot water made a noise. "It's 48 years old. It objects to effort." Willa glanced toward the kitchen. "Does everything in this house complain?" "Only the things still functioning." A small change touched her expression, not quite trust. Perhaps only surprise that the old man could speak before coffee without sounding angry. A knock came at the door. Rook rose too quickly. Its rear left leg faltered, and for half a second its weight shifted awkwardly toward the wall. Mac saw it. So did Willa. She moved down the stairs at once and put one hand near Rook's shoulder, not restraining the dog, but letting it know where she was. "It's probably Pell," Mac said. He approached the door from the side rather than walking directly past Rook. Through the window, Deputy Warren Pell stood on the porch holding a cardboard tray with 3 cups. Warren wore the olive-brown winter uniform of the county sheriff's office beneath a heavy coat. At 44, he carried authority without trying to enlarge himself. A narrow streak of silver showed at his right temple, and when Mac opened the door, Warren stood slightly off-center so he did not block the exit. "Brought coffee," Warren said. Mac looked at the 3 cups. "That how investigations work now?" "It's how mornings work." Warren stepped inside only after Willa nodded. He did not begin with questions about where she had come from or what had happened. He asked whether she had slept, whether she needed medical attention, and whether she still wished to remain at Mac's house. Willa stood beside the table with both hands wrapped around one of the coffee cups. "Yes," she said. "For now." "And do you want to make a report this morning?" Her fingers tightened around the cardboard sleeve. "No." Warren accepted the answer without changing his face. He took a folded card from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. The name Naomi Kessler was printed across the front, followed by the number of Clear Haven's Adult Transition and Support Center. "You can call without filing anything," Warren said. "You can ask questions without committing to a plan. Nobody there will send anyone to your house unless you request it." Willa looked at the card but did not pick it up. Warren added, "I'll note that you're here voluntarily and that you declined to report today. If that changes, call me." Mac leaned against the counter. Warren glanced toward him. "And you call me before making any heroic decisions." "I haven't made one in years." That answer concerns me more than it reassures me. When Warren left, the house became quiet again, but the quiet had changed. There was now a name on the table and a number Willa could call. A door that had not existed the night before had appeared, even if she was not ready to open it. Mac went to the stove. Breakfast required fewer emotions than conversation. He cooked oats in a dented saucepan, added eggs on the side, and placed 3 bowls on the table. Rook approached its bowl, sniffed once, and stepped away. Willa noticed immediately. "He ate yesterday." "What?" "A little." Mac crouched several feet from the dog. He did not reach out. In the daylight, Rook's condition was more visible. Its ribs did not protrude sharply, but the waist narrowed too much beneath the thick winter coat. When it turned, the rear left leg moved with a small delay. Near the lower ribs, dark fur had clumped together. Blood. Not fresh, but not old enough to ignore. "We need a veterinarian," Mac said. Willa's head rose sharply. "No. It may need antibiotics." "They'll call someone." "Who?" "Animal control. Or Celia." Mac looked at her. She lowered her voice. "They might say he isn't mine." "Is he?" "Yes." "Legally?" The question seemed to offend and frighten her at the same time. "My mother adopted him. She left him to me." "Do you have paperwork?" "At home." "Where?" "In a safe." "Whose safe?" Willa did not answer. Mac turned off the stove before the oats could burn. "Petra can scan the chip. She won't take him from you because someone makes a phone call." "You don't know that." "I know Petra." "That isn't the same thing." Mac almost said it was. He stopped himself. Willa had survived by doubting assurances. Demanding that she abandon that instinct in one morning would not be kindness. "All right," he said. "You can call the clinic yourself. Ask what happens before we go." She studied him, expecting pressure. Mac pushed the phone across the table. Willa called. 20 minutes later, they were driving toward Clear Haven with Rook stretched across the back seat. Sunlight turned the snowbanks beside the road into walls of white fire. The town appeared below them in a wide valley of steep roofs, chimney smoke, and plowed streets. Clearhaven looked cheerful after a storm. That was one of winter's more convincing tricks. Dr. Petra Loomis ran the only veterinary clinic within 40 miles. The building had once been a feed store, and one wall still carried the faded outline of a painted horse. Petra met them in the examination room wearing a dark teal veterinary coat beneath an unzipped gray parka. Her steel gray hair was cut short against the back of her neck. Black square glasses rested low on her nose, and a tiny mole near the left corner of her mouth shifted when she frowned. She looked at Mac first. "You look terrible." "Good morning to you too." "I wasn't finished. You also look stubborn." "That part's chronic." Petra turned toward Willa, and her voice changed. Not softer in a false way, simply more precise. "I'm Petra. You decide what happens in this room unless Rook is in immediate danger. I'll tell you before I touch him." Willa glanced at Mac, then back at Petra. "All right." Rook did not climb onto the examination table. Petra examined him on a padded mat on the floor. She moved slowly, speaking each step aloud. When her hand reached the left side of his ribs, Rook's muscles tightened. Willa knelt near his head. "He doesn't bite," she said. Petra did not look up. "That isn't a promise any frightened animal should have to keep." She scanned the microchip. For several seconds, only the machine's soft beeping filled the room. Then Petra read the record. The original registration named Eleanor Dane, Willa's mother. An attached veterinary note documented Eleanor's written transfer of care to Willa shortly before her death. Petra turned the screen slightly. "Your mother added you as the legal caretaker." Willa stared at the name. Her shoulders dropped by less than an inch. It was the smallest movement in the room, but Mac felt its weight. Celia had not taken everything. There were still places where Willa existed in writing as someone trusted, chosen, and capable of care. Petra continued the examination. Rook was mildly underweight and dehydrated. The cut beneath the fur was shallow, but bruising spread around it. An X-ray showed an old rib fracture that had healed imperfectly. The joint in the left rear leg showed early arthritis. More troubling were the scars. They did not belong to one accident. Some were thin and pale beneath the fur. Others were darker and slightly raised. 3 lines crossed the left side of Rook's body at different angles. Petra stood and removed her gloves. "These happened at different times," she said. Willa's hand stopped moving over Rook's neck. "How can you tell?" "Color, tissue, the way the fur grew back." Petra pointed toward the newest bruise without touching it. "This one could be from the metal clasp on a heavy leash or chain, not from ordinary walking." Mac felt heat rise behind his ribs. He kept his hands flat against his knees. Petra's gaze moved to him briefly, warning without words. "This dog has been putting his body between something and someone," she said, more than once. Willa looked down. Rook rested his muzzle against her thigh. Petra did not ask who had struck him. She did not ask Willa to confirm anything. "If he keeps doing that," she said, "one day he may not be able to stand back up." The sentence landed more deeply than accusation would have. Willa closed her eyes. On the drive back, Mac did not ask questions. He allowed the road to move beneath them for several miles. Rook lay on a folded blanket with pain medication beginning to make his eyelids heavy. Willa sat turned slightly toward the back seat, watching every breath. Near the frozen river she began to speak. "My mother died 2 years ago." Mac kept his eyes on the road. "I left school when she got sick. It was supposed to be 1 semester." "What were you studying?" "Automotive technology." The answer came with embarrassment, as though skill were something she had been caught pretending to possess. "My dad works out of state most of the year," she continued. "Mining equipment. He sends money home." "And Celia?" "My stepmother handles everything." The phrase sounded practiced. Willa explained that Celia had suggested a shared bank account to simplify bills. Then she began taking Willa's wages directly. The car Willa used stopped running, and Celia said repairs were too expensive. Her birth certificate, Social Security card, and driver's license were kept inside the family safe. She said, "I lose things." "Do you?" "No." The word was quiet, but it carried the first edge Mac had heard in her voice. Celia did not strike her every day. That was part of what made the truth difficult to hold. Sometimes weeks passed without an incident. Celia cooked meals, bought gifts, and apologized with tears. Afterward, she blamed medication, loneliness, or Graham's long absences. Then the rules would tighten again. Willa could not leave without explaining where she was going. She could not take money from the account without permission. If she argued, Celia threatened to report Rook as dangerous. She said he'd bitten her. Did he? No, he stood between us. Mac looked at Rook in the mirror. The dog's head rested on the blanket, but one eye remained open. What happened last night? Mac asked. Willa pressed both hands together between her knees. She was angry because I'd emailed the college. Mac waited. I asked whether I could reapply. The words made something in him ache more than the violence he expected next. Celia had found the email. She accused Willa of planning to abandon the family. The argument moved into the mudroom. When Celia grabbed Willa's arm, Rook stepped between them. Celia took the heavy leash from its hook. She swung the clasp, Willa said. He didn't move away. Her voice broke, but she continued. Afterward she cried. She said she didn't mean to hit him. She said if I left, she'd call animal control and tell them he attacked her. Willa looked toward the back seat. So I waited until she took her pills and fell asleep. I packed clothes and my mother's tools. I thought I could reach town before morning. Mac's grip tightened around the steering wheel. He imagined turning the truck around. He imagined a front door opening, Celia's face, and the satisfying simplicity of anger given a target. Then he looked at Willa. Her life had already been shaped by people deciding what would happen next. He would not join them. You can stay 7 days, he said. She turned toward him. 7? Long enough to call Naomi, replace papers, and decide what you want. What if I don't know? Then you decide what you need to know first. And after 7 days? We talk again. She watched him carefully. What are the rules? Medical appointment for you, a call to Naomi, new bank account if she recommends it. That sounds like rules? It is. You said I decide. You decide whether to stay. If you stay, I won't pretend sleeping in my house solves anything. Willa leaned back against the seat. For a moment, Mac thought she would reject the offer. Instead, she nodded. That evening, sunlight faded from gold to blue across the snow. Petra's medicine allowed Rook to eat a small meal and sleep near the kitchen table. Mac was carrying firewood inside when the wind shifted. A length of old chain hanging beside the workshop dragged across the concrete. The sound was brief. Rook vanished beneath the table. His body struck a chair leg. The bowls rattled. He pressed himself against the wall, trembling so hard the tags on his collar clicked together. Willa dropped to her knees. Rook. Mac raised one hand. Don't pull him out. He needs me. He knows where you are. Mac sat on the floor several feet away, turned slightly sideways, and rested his hands on his knees. He did not speak to Rook. He did not use commands from another life. Willa remained on the opposite side of the room. Minutes passed. The chain outside moved again, softer now. Rook's breathing slowed by degrees. First his muzzle appeared beneath the table, then one shoulder. He crawled out cautiously. Instead of going directly to Willa, he crossed the narrow space toward Mac and placed one front paw on the toe of the old man's boot. Mac did not touch him. Rook lowered himself to the floor between them, his eyes still fixed on Willa. It was not trust. Not yet. It was something smaller and perhaps more honest. The first recognition that the room contained more than one safe direction. On the third morning, Naomi Kessler arrived without a folder of forms in her hands. That surprised Willa more than anything else about her. She had expected someone official-looking, perhaps carrying a clipboard, perhaps speaking in the careful voice people used when they had already decided what was wrong with her. Instead, Naomi stepped through Mac's front door in a plum-colored wool coat, a cream scarf looped neatly at her throat, and low winter boots dusted with snow. She was 67, small in stature, with warm brown skin and short silver-black curls. Her posture was straight but unhurried. She carried a mustard-yellow notebook beneath one arm, though she did not open it. Rook watched her from beside the stove. Naomi noticed. "May I sit there?" she asked Willa, pointing to a chair near the kitchen table. The question was ordinary. Its effect was not. Willa nodded. Naomi removed her coat, sat down, and kept both hands visible on the table. Mac remained near the sink, pretending to repair the handle of a kitchen drawer that had functioned adequately for years. "I'm not here to ask why you stayed," Naomi said. Willa looked up. Most questions about her life had begun there. "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you call? Why did you let her keep your money?" Naomi continued, "I want to know what would have to change so you don't have to go back." The room seemed to shift around the sentence. Rook lowered his head onto his paws. Willa stared at the steam rising from her tea. For a long time she said nothing. Then she answered carefully, "I need my own money." Naomi nodded once. "My papers, my license, my school records." Another nod. "And I need her not to know where I am." Naomi reached toward the yellow notebook but stopped before touching it. "May I write that down?" Willa looked at the notebook, then at Naomi. "Yes." Only then did Naomi open it. They worked through the morning in small, practical steps. Naomi helped Willa create a new email address, change passwords, and contact a local bank about opening an account that Celia could not access. They requested replacement identification and arranged for official documents to be mailed to the support center rather than Mac's house. Nothing about the process felt heroic. It involved security questions Willa could not remember, long periods on hold, and one automated phone system that disconnected them after 23 minutes. Naomi redialed without complaint. Mac placed a plate of toast on the table sometime near noon. No one had asked for it. Willa noticed that he had cut the pieces in half. He did not say why. Naomi also arranged a medical appointment. She explained that Willa could document injuries without deciding that day whether to pursue charges. "Records are not promises," Naomi said. "They are simply a way of keeping today from being rewritten tomorrow." Willa's fingers stopped over the keyboard. That idea unsettled her. Celia had always been best after the worst moments. She remembered birthdays, folded laundry, and made apologies sound like confessions of love. By morning, the event itself would begin to change shape. A shove became a misunderstanding. A bruise became clumsiness. Fear became ingratitude. Willa had spent so long watching the past soften around Celia's voice that she no longer trusted the hard edges of her own memories. "Yes," she said. "Make the appointment." Outside, the low growl of Lenny's truck announced his arrival before he knocked. He entered carrying 2 lengths of copper pipe beneath one arm and a paper sack beneath the other. His mustard knit cap was crooked, his gray-blonde mustache glittered with melted snow, and his expression suggested he had already discovered something amusing. He stopped when he saw Naomi, Willa, and Rook. Then he looked at Mac. "You left out a few details. I told you there were guests. You said a situation. That could mean a clogged drain." "It often does." Lenny placed the sack on the counter. "I brought cinnamon rolls. They're slightly crushed, but I've been assured shape has no effect on morality." He introduced himself to Willa without asking why she was there. He greeted Naomi with the cautious respect of a man who suspected she could see through jokes but hoped she might permit them anyway. Then he looked around the kitchen. The cold coffee mug that had sat beside Mac's stove for nearly a week was gone. Lenny pointed at the empty space. "I knew this day would come." Mac frowned. "What day?" "The day someone entered this house with enough courage to remove that cup. I was still using it." "For what? A mold experiment?" Willa looked down, but a soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound surprised everyone except Lenny. He smiled as if nothing unusual had happened and went outside to help Mac retrieve the trailer from the forestry turnout. By afternoon, the salvaged generator sat on 2 wooden blocks inside Mac's workshop. The space smelled of cold iron, sawdust, and fuel. Tools hung along one wall in strict rows, while salvaged parts occupied the remaining shelves according to a system understood only by Mac. Sunlight poured through the wide doors, warming a rectangle of concrete where Rook settled on an old moving blanket. Willa stood near the generator. "I can help," she said. Mac wiped snowmelt from the metal casing. "You need rest." "I've been resting." "You've been filling out government forms. That counts as combat." "I want to pay you back." Mac straightened. There it was again. The belief that every safe thing had to be purchased before it could be taken away. You don't owe rent. I ate your food. You insulted my oatmeal. That made us even. I'm serious. So am I. Willa folded her arms. I don't want to sit in the house while everyone does things for me. Mac studied her for a moment. Then he pointed toward the generator. Tell me why it won't start. She moved closer. The machine was old, painted red once, but now mostly rust and grime. Mac pulled the starter cord. The engine coughed twice, sputtered, and died. Willa tilted her head. Again. Mac pulled. This time she listened with her eyes closed. Fuel line is cracked. Mac looked down. You can hear that? I can hear it starving. Lenny, seated on an overturned bucket nearby, crossed his arms. I like her. Mac ignored him. Anything else? Carburetors clogged. Mac removed the side panel and examined the line. It was cracked. His mouth tightened. Willa noticed and wisely said nothing. Mac cleaned the carburetor himself. He worked quickly, with the quiet certainty of someone accustomed to having his hands obey before his mind finished explaining. He reassembled the parts, pulled the cord, and produced a violent metallic cough. Then silence. Lenny leaned forward. Historic. Mac tried again. Nothing. A decisive victory, Lenny continued, for youth over military pride. Your truck has 3 different colored doors. It has character. It has tetanus. Willa knelt beside the generator. May I? Mac moved back half a step, then stopped. The movement was small, but Willa saw the reluctance in it. The workshop belonged to him in a way the house no longer did. His tools were not merely equipment. They were evidence that his hands still knew how to make broken things useful. She waited. Mac handed her the wrench. Willa removed the housing and inspected the parts he had just cleaned. Her fingers changed when she worked. They stopped fidgeting. Her shoulders opened. She no longer watched Mac's expression before making each movement. You put the float in backward, she said. Lenny made a sound that might have been a cough. Mac looked at the part. That design is backward. The design has been backward since 1987 then. She replaced it, fitted a new section of fuel hose and tightened the clamp. When she pulled the starter cord, the generator coughed once, then settled into a rough but steady rhythm. The sound filled the workshop. Willa remained crouched beside it, one hand on the frame. For the first time since she had arrived, she smiled without checking whether anyone else approved. It was not a large smile. It was enough to change her face. Mac watched the engine vibrate beneath her palm and understood that the generator had done something he could not. It had given her a problem with an honest answer. No apology, no shifting memory, no person insisting the damage was imaginary. Only a damaged line, a reversed part, and an engine that either ran or did not. The following day, Mac let Willa into the welding corner. He called it a lesson, though within 10 minutes it began to sound like an operation. Feet wider. Willa adjusted. Shoulders square. She adjusted again. Keep the torch steady. Don't chase the pool. Watch the edge. Move. Willa lifted the visor. I can't do 6 things at once. You're doing 3. You're saying 12. Mac stared at her. Lenny, sanding a cabinet door across the shop, slowed his hand without looking up. Willa removed one glove. I need someone to teach me, she said. I don't need another person commanding me. The words landed harder than she intended. Mac's face went still. For an instant he looked less angry than emptied. Willa's old instinct rose immediately. I'm sorry. Mac looked down at the torch in her hand. No, he said. She waited. He cleared his throat. You don't need to apologize for saying it. The admission cost him something. He stepped beside her but did not touch her shoulders. May I adjust your grip? Willa considered the question. Then she nodded. Mac moved 2 of her fingers and stepped away. Try again. The weld was uneven and ugly. Lenny examined it afterward and declared it structurally optimistic. Mac said it would hold. Willa knew that was not praise exactly, but it was close. The house began to collect new sounds over the next several days. Water running while Willa washed dishes before Mac reached them. The soft scrape of Naomi's pen during phone calls. Lenny's laughter carrying from the workshop. The generator turning over successfully each morning. Rook developed his own routine. He slept in the sun near the workshop doors, rising stiffly after long periods on the blanket. He moved between Willa and Mac without urgency now, though loud voices still made his body tense. When a cabinet slammed in the kitchen, he disappeared into the hallway until Willa opened the door and let him inspect it. Mac tried whistling once. It was the short, sharp signal he had used years ago. Rook lifted his head, considered him, and looked toward Willa instead. Lenny laughed so hard he had to sit down, outranked by a civilian dog. He lacks discipline. He has judgment. Mac did not whistle again. That night the house was quiet except for the furnace and the wind brushing snow from the roof. Willa slept upstairs. Rook lay near the stove. Mac woke standing in the hallway. He did not remember leaving the couch. Smoke filled his vision, though the house was clear. Somewhere beyond the walls, a helicopter beat the air into pieces. His right hand was pressed against the military coin in his pocket. His left reached toward the locked gun cabinet beside the workshop entrance. He saw rock walls. A narrow passage. A dog harness disappearing through dust. Mac. The voice came from far away. He pulled at the cabinet handle. Locked. His breathing shortened. Rook stood between him and the cabinet. The dog did not bark or bare its teeth. It simply occupied the space, chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Mac stared at the movement. In, out. The smoke wavered. Mac, Willa said again. She sat on the bottom stair, wrapped in a blanket. She had not come closer. You're in Clear Haven. His fingers tightened around the cabinet handle. In your house, she continued. The workshop is behind you. The stove is on your left. Mac looked at Rook's chest. In, out. The hallway returned by pieces. Wood floor, locked cabinet, amber light from the stove, a young woman on the stairs, a dog who was not Jasper. Mac released the handle. He sat down on the floor without looking at either of them. Rook moved to the side but did not touch him. Willa remained where she was. No one asked what he had seen. By morning, the silence around the event had hardened into an agreement. Willa placed a cup of coffee in front of Mac. Rook snores, she said, like a tractor stuck in snow. Mac wrapped both hands around the cup. At least tractors have replacement parts. Rook thumped his tail once beneath the table. Later that afternoon, Willa's new phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. The color drained from her face. A voicemail had arrived from Celia. Willa stood in the empty kitchen while Mac worked outside. Rook slept near the heater. She pressed play. Celia's voice was gentle, not angry, not slurred, gentle. She said she had been terrified since Willa disappeared. She said Mac was an unstable, lonely veteran who had taken advantage of a confused young woman. She said Willa had always been sensitive after her mother's death. She promised nothing like that night would ever happen again. Then Celia began to cry. I miss you, she whispered. Please come home before he convinces you that your family is the enemy. The message ended. Willa played it again. The first time, fear tightened her throat. The second time, grief broke through it. The third time, she began to wonder whether Celia remembered the night differently. Perhaps the leash had slipped. Perhaps Rook had moved too quickly. Perhaps Willa had made everything worse by leaving. Rook raised his head from the floor. Willa looked at him. The scars beneath his fur did not change. The old fracture did not disappear. But Celia's voice had never needed to erase facts completely. It only needed to make Willa uncertain enough to return. Celia Dane arrived in Clear Haven beneath a flawless blue sky. There was no storm to announce her, no darkness to make her intentions appear more sinister than they were. The roads had been plowed clean, sunlight glittered across the snowbanks, and the brass bell above the sheriff's office door gave a polite little chime when she entered. She carried a covered casserole dish in both hands. Deputy Warren Pell looked up from his desk. Celia wore a long, stone-gray wool coat belted neatly at the waist. A wine-colored turtleneck showed at her throat, and her ash-blonde hair curved inward just above her shoulders without a strand out of place. Her black leather boots were nearly untouched by road salt. She looked like someone arriving to apologize for missing a church dinner. "Deputy Pell?" she asked. Warren stood. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Celia Dane. I believe you've spoken to my stepdaughter." She placed the dish on the corner of his desk as if they were beginning a social visit. "I brought food," she said. I didn't know whether she'd been eating. Warren did not touch the dish. "Willa is safe." Relief crossed Celia's face with such precision that Warren could not tell whether it had been felt or practiced. "Thank God." She sat only after he offered a chair. Her movements were controlled, but one thumb pressed repeatedly into the center of her opposite palm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said. "I only want her home. Willa is 21. I know how old she is. She told me she left voluntarily." Celia lowered her eyes. "Willa hasn't been herself since her mother died." The sentence sounded compassionate. It also placed doubt around everything Willa might say next. Celia described a young woman who forgot appointments, became overwhelmed easily, and had developed an unhealthy dependence on an aging dog. She said Rook had become unpredictable. She said Willa sometimes interpreted ordinary disagreements as threats. Then she mentioned Mac. "I looked him up," Celia said. "He's a veteran. He lives alone. People say he has episodes." Warren's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Wetherby contacted this office before transporting Willa anywhere. He gave his location, plate number, and home address. Willa spoke to me directly and agreed to stay there temporarily. I'm not saying he kidnapped her." "You used the word taken when you called dispatch." Celia's thumb stopped moving. "I was frightened." Warren leaned back slightly. "Are you reporting a crime?" "I'm asking you to consider whether a confused young woman is capable of recognizing when she's being manipulated." The room became very still. Warren had heard similar sentences before. Sometimes they came from people who truly believed they were protecting someone. Sometimes they came from people who could not tolerate losing access to them. Often, the speaker did not know which one they were. "Willa has not been declared incapable of making her own decisions," he said. "Unless that changes through a lawful process, her choices remain hers." Celia looked toward the window. Clearhaven's winter market had opened across the street. Adults in wool coats moved between wooden stalls selling preserves, candles, and repaired household goods. Everything outside looked cheerful and public. "I only want to speak with her," Celia said. "I'll pass along that request." "Will you tell me where she is?" "No." For the first time, something hard entered her face. It disappeared almost immediately. Celia stood and smoothed her coat. "Please give her the food." Warren looked at the covered dish. "I'll let her know you brought it." Celia left without raising her voice. By noon, 3 people in Clearhaven had heard that Mac Wetherby was sheltering an unstable young woman. By evening, the number had become 9. No one could later identify exactly where the story had changed. Celia did not stand in the market making accusations. She spoke quietly to a woman outside the pharmacy, saying she was worried. The woman mentioned it to her brother, who owned a roofing company. Someone else remembered seeing Mac leave Petra's clinic with Willa and Rook. Concern traveled faster than cruelty because people felt virtuous carrying it. 2 days later, Mac received a call from a property manager who had hired him to clear an old hunting cabin. "We're postponing," the man said. "Until when?" "Just until things settle." "What things?" A pause followed. "You know." Mac did not. Not until a second customer canceled the same afternoon. Lenny found him in the workshop tightening a bench vise that did not need tightening. "You're going to strip the threads," Lenny said. "They were weak. They survived 20 years before your mood attacked them." Mac turned the handle again. Lenny leaned against the workbench, his mustard cap pushed back on his head. "People are talking. People talk when their own lives run out of material. This isn't nothing." Mac released the vise. Across the shop, Willa was sorting replacement fittings beside the repair generator. She had heard enough to understand. Rook lay near her boots, eyes open. Mac reached for the folder Petra had given them. Inside were the veterinary report, photographs of Rook's injuries, and confirmation of Willa's legal ownership. "We show them this," Mac said. Willa looked up. "Who?" "Anyone repeating her lies." "And tell them what?" "The truth." Naomi's voice came from the open workshop door. "Whose truth?" She stepped inside, brushing snow from her plum-colored coat. Her mustard notebook remained closed beneath one arm. Mac held up the folder. "The dog's injuries are documented." Yes. Willa was found half frozen. Yes. Celia is telling people I manipulated her. Naomi looked at Willa, not Mac. Do you want those photographs shared? Willa's hand froze over a brass fitting. Mac answered before she could. They would stop the rumors. Naomi's gaze returned to him. That wasn't my question. Mac's jaw tightened. She shouldn't have to defend herself. No, Naomi said. But you defending her without permission can still become another way her life is managed. The accusation struck more deeply because Naomi did not deliver it like one. Mac looked toward Willa. She had lowered her eyes. He remembered the welding lesson, his instructions coming faster than she could move, his hand reaching toward her before he thought to ask. He set the folder down. What do you want? He asked. Willa took a long breath. I don't want people seeing pictures of Rook. Mac nodded once. And I don't want my injuries discussed at the market. Another nod. But I don't want her deciding what everyone thinks happened. Naomi pulled out a chair but waited. Willa gestured for her to sit. Only then did Naomi open the notebook. They spent the next hour discussing options. Willa could make a limited written statement through the support center. Warren could confirm only that she was an adult staying somewhere voluntarily. Petra could preserve the veterinary record without releasing it publicly. None of those choices would silence every rumor. That was the hardest part. Truth was not a command Mac could give and expect the world to obey. Later, Willa stood alone in the upstairs bedroom. The door still bore shallow scratches near the latch where she had tested the lock on the first night. Her belongings occupied little space. Folded clothes, her mother's blue metal toolbox, and a paper envelope containing temporary banking documents. She had believed leaving Celia's house would feel like reaching the other side of something. Instead, she had entered another place where decisions gathered around her. Mac's decisions were kinder. That made them more difficult to recognize. He decided when she needed food, when she needed rest, which roads were safe, which papers should be shown. He usually had good reasons. He was usually right. Celia had also explained her control as protection. The comparison felt unfair. It also would not leave. That evening, Willa found Mac in the workshop. Rook followed her but stopped halfway between them. I'm moving tomorrow, she said. Mac set down the file he was using. To where? The transition center has an emergency apartment. You can stay here. I know. Has something happened? No. Then why leave? Willa looked at the rows of tools behind him. Each had a place. Every blade, wrench, and clamp existed within a system Mac understood. I need to know I can leave somewhere safe without it becoming unsafe. Mac's face tightened. You think I'd stop you? No, but I think you'd try to solve the reasons before letting me go. The silence that followed was not angry. It was wounded. Mac glanced toward Rook. What about him? The apartment is on the 3rd floor, no elevator. One of the residents has a serious dog allergy. He can't climb 3 flights twice a day. Petra already said that. Mac stared at her. You spoke to Petra? And Naomi. Without him. That was the part he felt before he understood it. Willa continued. The center can register you as his temporary foster caregiver. I remain his legal owner. I approve his treatment. I visit whenever the schedule allows. You've decided. Yes. The single word did not carry defiance. It carried fear, and the determination to act before fear changed her mind. Mac wanted to list every reason she should remain. The guest room was accessible. Rook was settled. The roads were still icy. He could drive her to appointments. She could work in the shop. Each reason was sensible. Together they sounded like a locked door without a key. When? He asked. Tomorrow morning. Mac looked down at the metal file in his hand. All right. Willa waited, as if expecting him to add conditions. He did not. The next morning, Naomi arrived with a small hatchback from the transition center. Warren had already documented Willa's change of residence. Petra sent medication instructions for Rook and signed the temporary care form. Nothing was improvised. Nothing depended solely on Mac's goodness. That fact should have reassured him. Instead, as Willa carried her small bag toward Naomi's car, the house seemed to begin emptying around her. Rook followed Willa to the porch. She knelt and held his face between both hands. "You're staying with Mac for a while." Rook watched her. "I'll come back." His damaged ear tipped forward. Willa pressed her forehead against his. Mac stood near the doorway, holding the blue metal toolbox. Willa looked up. "That comes with me." "Right." He handed it over. The box was heavier than it appeared. Mac had assumed she would leave it in the workshop where it could be useful. He realized that was another decision he had made without asking. Willa placed the toolbox in Naomi's car, then turned to him. "Thank you." Mac disliked the finality of the words. "It's not final," he said. "I know." She left anyway. For the next several days, Rook waited near the front door every afternoon at the time Willa had usually returned from appointments. When tires sounded on the road, he lifted his head. When they passed, he lowered it again. Mac worked too long in the shop. He tried moving a steel cabinet without calling Lenny and nearly dropped it on his foot. Lenny arrived in time to see the cabinet leaning dangerously against the bench. "What exactly are you proving?" he asked. "That the floor's uneven." "The floor didn't move the cabinet." Mac shoved harder. Lenny stepped in front of it. "You are 74. "I'm aware." "You act surprised every morning." Mac released the cabinet. "She left because she needed to," Lenny said. "I know." "That doesn't mean you failed." Mac looked toward the house where Rook lay beside the door. "Feels the same." Before Lenny could answer, a dark work truck turned into the driveway. It stopped hard enough to scatter snow. A large man stepped out wearing a brown job site coat with faded reflective strips. He had broad shoulders, a square face, and several days of gray-brown beard along his jaw. A burnt orange knit cap covered most of his dark hair, though silver showed at the temples. Graham Dane crossed the yard with the heavy planted stride of someone accustomed to standing on vibrating machinery. "Malcolm Wetherby?" Mac stepped out of the workshop. "Who's asking?" "Willa's father." Graham's eyes moved past Mac toward the house. "Where is my daughter?" "Not here." "You sent her somewhere?" "She chose to move." Graham came closer. "My wife says you turned her against her family." Lenny moved slightly to one side, not threatening, simply present. Mac remained still. "I found your daughter on a forest road in a blizzard," he said. "I called the sheriff before she entered my truck. She was upset. She was hypothermic." "You don't know her?" "No." "You don't know what she's like when she gets confused?" Mac studied him. The sentence carried Celia's shape. "I know what I saw." He led Graham inside, but not upstairs. On the kitchen table, he placed Warren's written confirmation that Willa had stayed voluntarily, the temporary foster agreement for Rook and Petra's sealed veterinary summary. Mac did not open the medical envelope. "That belongs to Willa," he said. "You'll hear the details from her if she chooses to tell you." Graham looked toward the staircase. Shallow marks remained near the bedroom lock where Willa's fingers had once tested the door. "She locked herself in?" "The first night?" "Because she didn't know you." "She chose the chair in every room that faced an exit." Graham's expression shifted. Mac continued. "Rook has old injuries and new ones. I witnessed none of them happen, so I won't tell you who caused them." "What are you telling me?" "That your daughter nearly froze rather than go home." A faint sound came from the hallway. Rook stepped into view. Graham's face changed immediately. "Rook." He crouched and extended one hand. The dog did not approach. Instead, Rook moved between Graham and the front door. Its body was quiet, its head level. It did not growl. Graham lowered his hand. "He knows me." "Yes," Mac said. The words seemed to trouble Graham more than if Rook had barked. Graham stood slowly. "I came home as soon as Celia called." Mac looked at the worn job site watch on his wrist, then at the tiredness around his eyes. "If you really want to help Willa," Mac said, "you'll have to listen to a story where coming home now doesn't erase the times you didn't." Graham stared at him. Rook remained between the man and the door, not threatening him, not welcoming him, simply holding a boundary no one had taught him to name. Graham arrived at this transition center 10 minutes early. For most of his working life, early had meant responsible. He had built a career around schedules, inspection windows, and machines that could not be persuaded by excuses. A hydraulic line either held pressure or it did not. A bearing either ran true or failed loudly enough to shut down a job site. Graham understood those kinds of problems. He did not understand the closed door in front of him. The center occupied the second floor of a renovated brick building near Clearhaven's old rail depot. Its waiting room had pale walls, several worn chairs, and a small table stacked with information about housing, legal aid, and financial abuse. Nothing in the room accused him. That made waiting harder. He removed his burnt orange knit cap and sat with it folded between his broad hands. His brown work coat still carried the faint smell of diesel and cold metal from the mining site he had left 2 days earlier. The large black watch on his wrist showed 9:52. He looked at it twice before Naomi Kessler opened the inner door. "Mr. Dane." Graham stood. Naomi wore a dark skirt, a cream sweater, and the plum-colored coat he had seen hanging by the entrance during his first appointment. Her mustard-yellow notebook rested under one arm. "Willa has agreed to meet with you," she said. "That does not mean she has agreed to leave with you." "I understand." Naomi studied him long enough to make the words feel tested. "Do you?" Graham's mouth tightened. "I came home, didn't I?" Naomi did not answer. She led him into a small meeting room with 2 windows facing the snow-covered rail yard. Willa sat at the far side of a round table. She wore her faded navy work jacket over a gray cream sweater. Her chestnut hair had been braided loosely over one shoulder, but several strands had escaped near her face. Her mother's blue metal toolbox rested against the wall beside her chair. Rook was not there. Graham noticed immediately. "Where's the dog?" Willa's expression closed. Naomi sat between them, though not directly in the center. "This first meeting is about Willa," she said. "I only asked." "You arrived less than a minute ago," Naomi replied. Graham pulled out a chair. He sat forward, forearms on his thighs, looking at his daughter as though physical closeness might shorten the distance between them. "You look tired." Willa said nothing. "I talked to Celia." Her shoulders stiffened. Graham saw it and continued anyway. "She says things got out of hand. She's not denying there was an argument." Willa looked toward the window. "Was it one argument?" Graham asked. "One bad night?" Naomi placed a hand lightly on her closed notebook. "Mr. Dane." "I need to know what happened." "No," Naomi said. "You want to know whether there is an explanation that allows your old life to remain intact." Graham turned toward her. "That's not fair. Fairness is not the purpose of this room." His face reddened. Willa spoke before he could answer. "You saw the bruise on my arm last summer." Graham looked back at her. "You said you fell in the garage." Celia was standing in the kitchen. "I didn't know that." "You never asked why she answered for me." Graham opened his mouth, then closed it. Willa's voice remained quiet. That made every word harder to dismiss. "When we called, she was always nearby. If I moved the camera, she moved too. If I stopped talking, she finished the sentence. I thought she was helping." "You thought whatever let you get back to work." The sentence struck him visibly. Graham sat back. Outside, a freight car rolled slowly along a distant track, metal wheels giving off a low, hollow groan. "I sent money," he said. "I know." "More every month." "I know." "Then why didn't you tell me you weren't getting it?" "I did." "No, you said things were tight." "I asked if I could get my own account." "You said the fees weren't worth it." "I asked if I could move out." "You said wait until your project ended." "I told you my car had been broken for almost a year." "I thought parts were back-ordered." Willa looked at him. "Did you ever call the shop?" Graham's silence answered. He reached for his watch, rubbing one thumb across its scratched face. Naomi noticed. "Take it off." He frowned. "What?" "The watch." "Why?" "Because you have checked it 6 times since entering the building." Graham stared at her. "I'm not in a hurry." "Then show her." The room held still. Slowly, Graham unfastened the black rubber strap and placed the watch face down on the table. Willa watched the movement. It was a small thing, almost embarrassingly small. Yet for the first time that morning, Graham no longer looked like a man fitting his daughter into a space between obligations. Naomi opened her notebook. "Mr. Dane, you keep asking what Celia did. Ask a different question." "What question?" "What does Willa need in order to feel safe?" Graham looked at his daughter. The answer did not come naturally to him. "What do you need?" he asked. Willa's eyes filled, though she did not look away. "I'm not going back to that house." Graham leaned forward. "Celia can leave." "I'm still not going back." "It's your home." "No, it's where I learned to listen for footsteps." The words quieted him. "I need my birth certificate, my social security card, and my license," Willa continued. "I need access to every account with my name on it. I need you not to talk to Celia for me. I need you not to tell her where I'm staying." Graham nodded too quickly. "And," Willa said, "I need you not to ask me to forgive you just because you came back." His eyes lowered. "I wasn't going to." "You were." He looked toward Naomi as if hoping she might soften the accusation. She did not. Graham rubbed both palms against his knees. "I saw Rook growl at Celia once," he said. Willa waited. "She told me he was getting aggressive. He growled because she cornered me in the laundry room. I didn't know." "You didn't ask." "I should have." The admission came out rough. Graham looked toward the empty space beside Willa's chair where Rook might have been lying. "I thought if there were a real problem, you'd tell me clearly." Willa's face tightened with something deeper than anger. "I was trying to survive clearly enough for you to notice." Graham bowed his head. For several seconds, no one spoke. He remembered a video call from 8 months earlier. Willa had worn a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm kitchen. Celia had stood behind the camera asking whether Graham was eating well and whether the camp had fixed its heating system. Willa had said almost nothing. At the time, he had felt grateful that his wife was keeping the conversation going. Now he understood gratitude could be another name for relief. He had not been blind. Blindness implied inability. He had looked directly at pieces of the truth and chosen the version that asked the least of him. The work came next. Not redemption. Work. With Naomi's guidance, Graham contacted the bank and authorized a full review of the household accounts. He discovered that deposits from Willa's job had entered an account Celia controlled. Several withdrawals matched overdue credit payments and purchases from pharmacies outside the family's normal provider. The records did not prove every act of abuse. They proved that Willa had not imagined losing control of her own wages. Warren began collecting statements. A former co-worker of Willa's, a woman named Cheryl Vance, confirmed that Celia had sometimes arrived at the service station on payday and asked the manager to release Willa's check directly to her. Cheryl had thought it strange but believed Celia's explanation that Willa was careless with money. An older neighbor, Everett Shaw, reported hearing repeated arguments through the winter. He had once found Rook chained near the back shed during freezing weather with an empty water bowl. When Everett knocked on the door, Celia told him the dog was being punished for lunging. Petra submitted Rook's veterinary findings. Willa's physician documented bruising on her upper arm and back that was consistent with her account, though not sufficient by itself to identify who had caused it. There was no hidden recording, no dramatic confession, no single paper that transformed Celia into a villain and everyone else into believers. There were only details: a check handed to the wrong person, a dog left in the cold, a long sleeve in a warm kitchen, a young woman who never had cash despite working. The truth had been visible in fragments. Its invisibility had depended on no one placing those fragments beside one another. Several days later, Warren informed Graham that Celia had agreed to leave the family home temporarily while the matter was reviewed. Graham drove directly to the transition center. "I can take you home now," he told Willa. They were standing in the building's small courtyard, where sunlight had melted the top layer of snow from the benches. Willa stared at him. "She's gone," Graham said. "You won't have to see her." "I told you I'm not going back." "It's empty." "That doesn't make it safe." Graham looked frustrated. "What do you want me to do with the house?" "I don't care. It was your mother's home too. That's why it hurts." He went quiet. Willa's mother had painted the kitchen cabinets herself. Her old sewing basket still sat in the hall closet. Graham had assumed those memories would pull Willa back. He had not considered that love could make a place more painful rather than less. Graham rented a furnished apartment near Clear Haven before the end of the week. It was small and smelled faintly of new carpet. He told no one the move was temporary. For the second meeting, Willa agreed to let Rook come. Mac drove the dog to the center but did not enter the meeting room. He handed the leash to Naomi and waited outside with a cup of coffee gone cold between his hands. Rook reached Willa first. Its tail moved once, low and heavy, before it pressed its head against her stomach. She knelt and wrapped both arms around its neck. Graham entered a moment later. Relief overcame caution. Willa. He stepped forward too quickly. Rook moved between them. The German Shepherd did not bark. Its body simply filled the space, head low, shoulders squared. Graham stopped. Willa did not call the dog away. For a moment, hurt crossed Graham's face. Then he remembered the first meeting, the watch, the questions, the years of assuming access to his daughter because he was her father. He lowered himself slowly into the nearest chair. "I'm staying here," he said. Rook remained standing. Graham placed his hands on his knees. "I'm not going to touch you." Minutes passed. Naomi said nothing. Willa sat across from her father with one hand resting against Rook's side. Eventually, the dog's shoulders eased. It did not approach Graham, but it sat down. Graham understood the difference. Tolerance was not trust. Proximity was not forgiveness. A door opened an inch was still not an invitation to enter. He looked at Willa. "I signed a 6-month lease," he said. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." The answer mattered more than he expected. Willa began meeting him once a week. Sometimes they spoke at the center. Sometimes they drank coffee in a public diner where the exits were visible and no one had authority over the other. Their conversations did not improve in a straight line. Some ended early. Some contained only weather and work. Graham stopped asking whether she believed Celia was sorry. He began asking whether Willa needed a ride, then accepted no as a complete answer. During the same week, Willa applied for a trial position at Boone Agricultural Repair. The shop stood near the southern edge of town, its wide metal doors painted a faded blue. Inside were tractors, snowblowers, and small engines in various states of disassembly. Darla Boone met Willa beside a workbench. At 55, Darla had strong forearms, red-brown hair streaked with silver, and a square face marked by smudges of machine grease. She wore steel blue coveralls with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. A white paint marker rested in her breast pocket. "Mac says you're good," Darla said. Willa stiffened. "He said that?" "He said you put a generator float in the correct direction after he didn't." "That sounds more like him." Darla pointed toward a snowblower with its housing removed. "Reassemble the intake. Don't impress me. Just don't lie if you get lost." Willa worked for nearly an hour. When she finished, the engine turned but would not start. Her stomach dropped. She saw Celia's expression in her memory before it had even existed in the room, the disappointed pause, the sigh, the question about why Willa never listened. "I can fix it," Willa said quickly. Darla set down her wrench. "I assume so. I put something in wrong." "Then take it apart." Willa stared at her. "You're not angry?" Darla looked genuinely puzzled. "Did you set the shop on fire?" "No." "Did you hide the mistake?" "No." "Then we have an engine that doesn't start. That's called Tuesday." Willa removed the housing again. She found the spacer installed backward. Darla did not hover. She marked another machine with the white pen and left Willa to correct the work. When the snowblower finally started, its engine gave a loud, uneven roar before settling. Willa stood in the exhaust-scented air with one hand on the handle. No one praised her as extraordinary. No one punished her for failing the first time. Darla merely glanced over. "Be here at 7 tomorrow." Willa looked at the machine, then at her grease-darkened hands. For the first time, a mistake had not become evidence that she was incapable. It had become a task she was allowed to do again. The second storm arrived without the courtesy of surprise. By noon, every radio in Clear Haven was warning of falling temperatures, whiteout conditions, and roads that would become dangerous before dark. The sky had already flattened into a pale sheet above the valley, and the wind carried loose snow across the pavement in thin, restless lines. Celia Dane had been allowed one supervised visit to the family house that morning. Deputy Warren Pell waited in the kitchen while she packed clothing, toiletries, and several personal documents. Celia moved carefully through the rooms in her stone-gray coat, placing each item into a suitcase as if order itself might restore authority. Then she opened the drawer beneath the hall telephone. It was empty. Her hand stopped. Warren noticed. Something missing? No. She closed the drawer too quickly. Months earlier, Celia had stored several bank statements, prescription bottles, and payment records inside an old cabin that had belonged to her late sister. The cabin stood north of Clearhaven near an abandoned logging road. She had chosen it because Graham rarely visited the property and Willa did not know where the spare key was kept. At least, Celia had believed she did not know. The records were not proof of every accusation, but they connected withdrawals, pharmacy purchases, and debts that Celia had insisted did not exist. The medication mattered even more. Some prescriptions were in her name, others were not. Warren watched her zip the suitcase. "You have somewhere to stay?" "Yes." "Drive carefully. The highway may close." Celia smiled politely. "I'm not going far." She waited until Warren's vehicle disappeared at the end of the road. Then she drove north. The highway closure came 20 minutes later after a truck jackknifed near the mountain pass. Celia's navigation system rerouted her toward an older Forest Service road, one that appeared on digital maps more confidently than it existed in winter. She should have turned back. Instead, she drove faster. Fear had narrowed her thinking until only one solution remained visible: reach the cabin first, remove the documents, return before anyone noticed. Snow thickened between the trees. The road became two shallow tire tracks divided by a ridge of ice. Celia gripped the steering wheel with both hands. The silver medicine case in her coat pocket pressed against her ribs each time the vehicle bounced. When the rear tires slid, she corrected too sharply. The car rotated sideways. For a moment, the forest moved across the windshield. Then the passenger side struck a snowbank, and the front fender slammed into a pine. The airbag did not deploy. The impact was not violent enough. It was violent enough to trap the driver's door and twist Celia's left leg beneath the dashboard. Her phone showed one bar of service. She called Graham. The connection broke 3 times before he answered. "Celia? I'm near the cabin." "What cabin?" "The one past Harker Road. I can't—" Static swallowed her voice. "Celia, where are you?" "The old logging turn. There's a marker. Blue paint. I can't open the—" The call ended. Graham tried again. No answer. He called Warren next. Within 15 minutes, the sheriff's office contacted Chief Odessa Raines. Odessa ran Clearhaven's volunteer rescue unit from the rear bay of the fire station. At 49, she had the broad shoulders and planted stance of someone accustomed to making decisions while other people were still describing the problem. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was braided tightly and pinned beneath a black knit cap. A brick-red rescue coat with reflective bands hung open over her uniform. When Graham arrived at the station, Willa was already there. Naomi had driven her after Warren called. Willa stood beside a table covered with topographic maps, her mother's blue toolbox nowhere in sight for once. Her face was pale, but her voice remained steady. "There was a cabin," she said. "Celia's sister owned it." Graham looked at her. "You knew?" "I saw an old tax notice once. Celia said the place had been sold." Odessa placed a paper map over the table. "Can you identify the road?" Willa studied the lines. "Not exactly." Her finger moved over several unmarked routes before stopping near a drainage basin. She used to complain that the bridge flooded in spring. There was a blue trail marker close to the turn. Odessa drew a circle around the area. "That gives us a search zone." Graham pulled on his gloves. "I'm coming." "No," Odessa said. "She called me." "And you are not trained for winter rescue." "I work in worse conditions than this." "You work around machinery with a crew and a safety plan. Today you are a worried family member." The words struck him, but Odessa had already turned to her team. Willa remained by the map. "Will you find her?" Odessa did not offer certainty. "We'll look in the right place." Mac heard about the call through Lenny, who had been listening to the county radio while replacing a warped cabinet door. By the time Odessa's team prepared to leave, Mac's old pickup was parked outside the station. Odessa met him in the bay. "No, you haven't heard what I'm offering. You're 74. I know those roads. You know the roads as they existed years ago. I cleared timber from that drainage last winter." Odessa crossed her arms. A small yellow rescue whistle hung against the left side of her coat. "You don't command this operation." "I didn't ask to." "You follow every instruction." "Yes." "You stop when told." Mac hesitated 1 second too long. Odessa's eyes narrowed. "Yes," he repeated. Lenny appeared behind him carrying 2 thermoses and wearing an expression of resigned irritation. "I'll watch him." "That has never worked," Odessa said. "No, but I've gathered useful data." Odessa allowed them to accompany the first vehicle only as local guides. A trained rescue technician named Luis Ortega would remain with them at all times. Rook was not part of the plan. The dog had spent the afternoon pacing between Mac and the front door, reacting to the tension in the house. When Mac put on his olive-green military coat and lifted his gloves from the table, Rook began circling him. "You're staying," Mac said. Rook looked at him. Mac pointed toward the blanket near the stove. "Stay." Rook walked to the door. Lenny folded his arms. Remarkable command presence. Mac ignored him. They took Rook to Petra before leaving town. The clinic was closing early because of the storm, but Petra examined the dog in the rear treatment room. "He is not a rescue dog," she said. "No one said he was." "You looked like you were about to." Petra checked Rook's heart rate, leg, and breathing. "He stays in the heated vehicle unless Odessa approves otherwise. Short distance only. No running, no climbing through deep snow, and no heroic nonsense." Mac raised an eyebrow. Petra pointed at him. "That last instruction applies to both of you." The rescue convoy moved north as daylight began to fail. 2 pickups carried equipment and 4 personnel. Behind them, Odessa drove a tracked utility vehicle on a trailer. Snow struck the windshields in waves, and the forest closed around the road until the world seemed reduced to headlights and white trunks. Willa remained at the station with Naomi and Graham. She had provided the location. Now she could do nothing but wait. That helplessness felt different from fear at Celia's house. There, waiting had meant listening for the next movement in the hallway. Here, waiting meant other people were doing their assigned work, following procedures that did not depend on Willa keeping anyone calm. Still, guilt found her. "What if I'm wrong about the cabin?" she asked. Naomi sat beside her. "Then the team adjusts." "What if she went somewhere else?" "Then that is information they will discover." Willa looked at the storm darkening the station windows. "I don't want her back in my life." Naomi nodded. "But I don't want her dead." Those wishes do not contradict each other. Willa pressed both palms against the edge of the table. For years, Celia had taught her that boundaries were cruelty. Now even a rescue felt like a test of whether Willa was still a good person. Naomi spoke quietly. "Helping someone survive does not require you to surrender the distance that keeps you safe." The rescue vehicles reached the blocked section of road shortly after sunset. A fallen pine lay across both tracks. Beyond it, the snow was too deep for the trucks. Odessa unloaded the tracked vehicle and a snow-capable ATV. Mac, Lenny, Luis, and 2 rescue members continued with her. Rook remained inside the heated cab until they reached the search zone. The terrain looked different beneath winter. Roads. Mac remembered as clear lanes had narrowed beneath new growth. A drainage ditch disappeared under smooth snow. Trail markers had faded or fallen. Mac unfolded an old forestry map beside Odessa. The cabin road should branch east after the ridge. Luis checked the GPS. Digital map says north. Digital map never hauled timber here. Odessa looked from one map to the other. "We verify both." They followed the ridge until the blue paint Willa remembered appeared on a cedar trunk, almost hidden beneath ice. 50 yards farther, Rook became restless in the vehicle. Mac opened the door. The dog climbed down carefully, rear legs stiff for the first several steps. It stayed close to Mac rather than ranging ahead. They approached a smooth stretch of snow between the trees. Rook stopped. Mac continued 1 step. The dog planted its feet. "Come on." Rook did not move. Mac looked down. There was no dramatic warning, no bark or growl, only refusal. He took the probe pole from the side of the ATV and pushed it into the snow ahead. The surface collapsed. Beneath it, runoff had eaten away the roadbed, leaving a narrow channel of moving water. Odessa shone her lamp into the opening. "We go around." Mac looked at Rook. "Good judgment," Lenny said. "Still no discipline." They detoured along the ridge. Near the abandoned cabin road, the wind carried a faint sound through the trees, metal striking wood. Then silence. Rook lifted his head. The sound came again. Clang, clang. Celia had found a tire iron beneath the passenger seat and was hitting it against the interior frame of the car. Rook turned toward the noise. Odessa raised one hand, signaling everyone to stop. The team listened. Another metallic strike carried from the ravine below. Luis and the rescue technicians moved first, secured by ropes as they descended. Odessa followed. Mac and Lenny remained at the upper edge with Rook, exactly as ordered. They found Celia's vehicle lodged between a snowbank and a pine. She was conscious but shivering violently, her left ankle trapped and swelling. The rescue team stabilized the car, opened the rear door, and removed her on a rigid litter. When they brought her to the road, Celia saw Mac. Confusion crossed her face, then suspicion. "Where's Willa?" "At the station," Mac said. "She didn't come?" "No." Celia's lips trembled from cold. "She sent you?" She told them where to look. Celia turned her face away. After a moment, she whispered, "She hates me." Mac stood beside the litter, snow collecting on the shoulders of his old jacket. "She helped save your life. She wouldn't come herself. Saving you does not mean giving you access to her." Celia looked at him. "You think you know what happened?" "No," Mac said. "I know what I witnessed after." The ambulance crew had not yet reached the transfer point. Odessa's team wrapped Celia in heated blankets and monitored her temperature. Celia's eyes remained open. "I never wanted her afraid of me." Mac said nothing. Her breath shook. "I only needed her to stop leaving." The admission was small, not a confession of every strike or every stolen dollar, not enough to settle a case, but it revealed the shape of the control beneath them. Celia had recognized Willa's fear. She had simply mistaken it for loyalty. The rescue team began moving the litter toward the vehicles. Mac followed on the ATV with Lenny and Rook. Halfway back, a tightness formed beneath his breastbone. He shifted his shoulders, blaming the cold. The pressure deepened. Trees seemed to tilt at the edge of his vision. His left hand slipped from the side rail. "Mac," Lenny said, "I'm fine." "That sounded dishonest even for you." Mac tried to step down from the ATV. His knee folded. Rook pressed against his leg before he could fall completely. The dog's body trapped him between the seat and the side rail. "Jasper," Mac breathed. The name escaped from somewhere older than the forest. Rook looked up. The right side of its muzzle was silvered unevenly. One ear stood, the other bent forward. Not Jasper, never Jasper. Mac gripped the dog's collar. "Rook," he corrected. The dog remained against him. Lenny shouted into the radio. Odessa turned the convoy around. By the time she reached them, Mac was pale, confused, and furious at everyone for noticing. "You're done," Odessa said. "I can ride back. You can lie down." "I'm not—" Odessa blew the yellow whistle once. The sharp sound cut through the wind. Mac stopped speaking. They transferred him to the heated rescue vehicle and placed oxygen beneath his nose. Rook lay on the floor near his boots, watching his face. At Clear Haven Regional Hospital, tests showed a mild cardiac arrhythmia worsened by cold, exertion, and exhaustion. There was no major heart attack, but the physician made it clear that Mac could no longer treat age as an inconvenience other people had invented. Lenny stood at the end of the bed with his arms crossed. "You survived combat, bad food, 3 decades of your own repairs, and now stubbornness nearly kills you in a county rescue vehicle." Mac closed his eyes. "You done?" "I have several additional points." The door opened. Willa entered alone. She had been informed that Celia was stable and would remain under observation. She walked to Mac's bedside but did not hug him. Mac opened his eyes. "She's alive," he said. "I know." "You gave them the right road." "I know." He waited for gratitude. It did not come. Willa's eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "You didn't have the right to do that." "Do what?" "Act like it wouldn't matter if you came back." Mac looked away. "I knew the terrain." "That isn't what I said." He rubbed one thumb over the worn edge of the military coin in his palm. Willa stepped closer. "You keep telling me I have to build a life where people don't decide for me. But you decided none of us had a say in whether you risked yours. I followed Odessa's orders, until your body gave out." Mac's jaw tightened. Willa looked toward Rook, who lay beneath the window with his head on his paws. "He waited for me when I left your house," she said. "Lenny waits for you to call before moving heavy things. Petra checks whether you're taking care of yourself. I came here because I thought you might die." Mac had spent years believing his life belonged only to him. That belief had once made survival simpler. No promises, no one waiting at a window, no animal learning the sound of his truck. Willa's voice softened, but not enough to release him from the truth. "You don't get to live like nobody needs you anymore." Mac looked at Rook. The dog lifted its head. Not Jasper. A different life. A different responsibility. For the first time, Mac understood that being needed was not the same as being trapped. Sometimes it was simply proof that a man had finally returned far enough for someone to notice when he was gone. By late February, winter had begun to loosen its grip on Clear Haven. Snow still covered the fields and the lower branches of the pines, but the days had grown longer. Sunlight remained on the roofs well into the afternoon, warming the ice until drops fell from the eaves in slow, measured beats. At Mac's workshop, the sound was almost constant. Drip, pause, drip. He sat at the workbench repairing the wooden handle of a rusted handplane while Lenny loaded 2 salvaged radiators into the back of the truck. Or tried to. Mac rose automatically. Lenny pointed at him without turning around. "Sit." "I was going to open the door." "The door is already open." "Then I was going to supervise." "You've been promoted to indoor supervision." Mac looked down at the small metal monitor strapped beneath his shirt, then at the list of restrictions Petra had taped to the workshop wall beside the light switch. No lifting over 20 pounds. No working alone in extreme cold. No pretending dizziness was just weather. The final line had been added in Petra's handwriting. Mac sat again. He disliked how quickly other people had begun organizing his life after the hospital. Lenny handled hauling. Petra called twice a week. Odessa had personally returned his map from the rescue and informed him that future participation would require medical clearance. Even Warren had stopped by to inspect the gun cabinet and helped install a second lock. Mac understood every precaution. Understanding did not make obedience feel dignified. He turned the handplane over and tested the repaired handle. It held. That helped. Across town, Willa stood behind the counter at Boone Agricultural Repair, writing an estimate for a damaged generator. Darla watched from the far side of the shop. "Too low," she said. Willa looked at the numbers. "The repair won't take long." "The repair takes however long it takes. The part costs what it costs. Your time is not a charitable donation." Willa adjusted the estimate. Darla's steel blue coveralls were marked with oil at one knee, and her red-brown hair had escaped its low knot in several silver-streaked strands. She leaned over the paper, white paint marker tucked into her breast pocket. "Too high now." Willa exhaled. "You said—" "I said value your time. I didn't say avenge it." Willa changed the number again. Darla nodded. "Better." 3 months earlier, correction had felt like danger. Now it felt irritating. Willa had begun to understand that irritation was often a luxury of safety. She worked 4 full days each week and 2 shorter shifts. Her wages entered an account under her name alone. She kept her identification, banking papers, and employment documents inside a small locked box in her apartment. The key stayed on a cord beneath her sweater. She checked for it less often now. The legal case against Celia did not end with a courtroom crowded by townspeople. There was no public confrontation. No one stood on the courthouse steps and declared Willa vindicated. Celia accepted a negotiated agreement related to the misuse of Willa's income, a minor assault charge, and failure to provide appropriate care for Rook. She was required to repay part of the money, comply with a no-contact order, attend treatment for prescription dependence, and complete a behavioral intervention program. Some people in Clear Haven believed the consequences were too lenient. Others thought they were too harsh. Willa learned not to build her life around either opinion. Celia had lost something more fundamental than her reputation. She could no longer call, arrive at Willa's work, send Graham with messages, or step into her life simply because she believed concern gave her permission. The boundary existed whether Celia accepted it or not. Graham filed for legal separation and remained in the furnished apartment near the rail depot. He met Willa once a week. Sometimes they sat at the diner and spoke about the years he had missed. Those conversations often ended with long silences and untouched coffee. Other times, they worked on an old lawnmower Graham had bought for $30 from a maintenance yard. The machine had no practical value. That was why it helped. One Saturday, Graham spent an hour trying to free a corroded bolt. Willa watched him apply too much force, then handed him penetrating oil without comment. He looked at the bottle. "You could have told me sooner." "You looked committed." A reluctant smile moved beneath his short gray-brown beard. They finished the afternoon without mentioning Celia. Graham no longer asked Willa whether she thought he was improving. He arrived when he said he would. He returned calls. When Willa canceled a meeting because she felt overwhelmed, he answered only, "All right, next week if you're ready." He was learning that consistency was an apology made over time. At Mac's house, Rook had regained much of the weight he had lost. The copper-gold fur along his chest looked richer against the dark charcoal saddle of his back. His ribs no longer showed when he turned. The silver around the right side of his muzzle remained, and his rear left leg still stiffened after long naps. He startled less often. A cabinet door could close without sending him beneath the table. The scrape of metal outside still raised his head, but he no longer searched immediately for Willa. Sometimes he simply went back to sleep. Willa visited almost every evening and stayed longer on her days off. Rook greeted her with a low sweep of his tail and pressed his head beneath her hand. But the arrangement had become difficult. Her emergency apartment was on the third floor of a building without an elevator. Even on good days, Rook paused after the first flight. By the second, his breathing changed. Petra warned that repeated climbing would worsen the arthritis. Willa's hours at Darla's shop also meant Rook would spend long stretches alone. She tried not to think of the solution before she was ready to say it aloud. Mac had already made changes without admitting why. He built a low wooden ramp beside the porch steps, claiming it would make moving equipment easier. Lenny pointed out that no equipment in the shop had 4 paws. Mac ignored him. A thick dog bed appeared near the stove, then a second water bowl beside the workbench. Mac began keeping Rook's medication in a labeled drawer and marking each dose on the calendar. Yet he never asked Willa whether Rook could remain permanently. His silence confused her until Petra explained it. "He's afraid he'll die first," Petra said. Willa looked through the clinic window at Mac waiting in the truck with Rook. "He said that?" "He said he was too old to make promises." "That sounds like him." "He also asked me how long a 7-year-old shepherd usually lives." Willa's throat tightened. The following Sunday, she brought Graham, Petra, and a folder of documents to Mac's house. Mac saw the folder and frowned. "Am I being served?" "Not unless you make this difficult," Willa said. Lenny, who had been repairing a shelf in the workshop, quietly moved his chair closer. Willa placed the papers on the kitchen table. "I want Rook to live here." Mac's expression did not change at first. "He already lives here most of the week. I mean as his primary home." Rook lay near the stove, one ear turned toward them. Mac looked at Willa. "You have your apartment now. 3 floors up. You could find another. Eventually. I can keep him until then." "That's not what I'm asking." Mac turned toward the window. Willa opened the folder. She had prepared an agreement stating that she remained Rook's legal owner. She would continue paying part of his food, medication, and veterinary expenses. Mac would be his primary caregiver. Petra would remain the medical contact. Graham had agreed to become the backup caregiver if Willa and Mac were both unavailable. Mac looked at him. Graham lifted one shoulder. "I have a ground-floor apartment. You work long hours. So does she. That's why there are 3 names on the plan." Mac's fingers rested on the edge of the table. "And if I end up in the hospital again?" "Then we follow the plan," Willa said. "If I die?" The room went still. Willa did not tell him not to speak that way. "Then Rook comes to me or Dad, depending on where I'm living and what Petra recommends." Mac looked at the papers. You thought this through? Yes. You shouldn't have to plan around an old man dying. I'm not planning around your death. I'm planning for Rook's life. The distinction held him. Rook rose and walked toward the table. He stood beside Mac, then leaned one shoulder lightly against the old man's leg. Mac did not interpret it as a decision. He understood dogs too well for that. Rook wanted warmth, familiarity, and the people he knew within reach. The humans were responsible for arranging the rest. I need to show you something, Mac said. He led Willa into the workshop. Beneath the workbench sat the old metal ammunition box. Mac had moved it from house to house for more than 20 years without allowing anyone to open it. He lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, field notebooks, a cracked watch, and a dark leather collar with a worn brass plate. Willa did not touch anything. "Jasper?" she asked. Mac nodded. He took out the collar. "I told people he died on a mission." Willa waited. It was easier. Mac sat at the bench, the collar across both palms. Jasper had been injured during an operation overseas. The wounds were serious but not immediately fatal. He was evacuated to a military veterinary facility while Mac underwent surgery at another location. For several weeks, Mac believed Jasper would recover. Then infection spread. The veterinarian called. Jasper was in pain. Treatment was no longer working. Mac had promised that he would be there if the time came. He was still confined to a medical facility hundreds of miles away. They held the phone near him, Mac said. "I talked. I don't know if he heard me." Willa sat beside him. "He died with someone?" "Yes. But not you." "No." Mac's thumb moved over the worn brass plate. "I kept thinking I failed the last thing I promised him. After that, every dog I considered taking in felt like a betrayal, or another promise I might not keep." Willa looked toward the workshop entrance where Rook had settled in the sunlight. "Rook doesn't need you to promise that you'll never leave." Mac said nothing. "He needs food tonight, medicine tomorrow, a ramp when his joints hurt, and people who know what to do if you can't be here." That doesn't sound very noble. It sounds useful. Mac gave a faint breath that might have been a laugh. Willa looked at Jasper's collar. "Loving Rook won't replace him." "I know. No, you know it in the way people know a fact they refuse to live by." Mac turned toward her. She continued, "A new love doesn't erase the old one. It only proves the heart isn't a room with one chair." For a long time, Mac remained still. Then he stood and carried Jasper's collar to the wall above the workbench. A faded photograph already hung there. Mac younger, sharper, one hand resting near a dark-coated dog whose attention was fixed on something beyond the camera. Mac placed a small hook beside the frame. He hung the collar there, not hidden, not discarded, given a place. The caretaker agreement was signed that afternoon. Mac also completed a legal pet care authorization with Petra's assistance and placed copies in the locked drawer, Willa's document box, and Graham's apartment. Lenny witnessed the signatures, then announced that he had never seen so much paperwork required for one dog to continue sleeping in the place where it already slept. Rook did not seem impressed. Several days later, Willa arrived before sunrise in an old blue pickup she had repaired with Darla. The body carried dents from previous owners, and one door was a slightly different shade, which Lenny claimed made it a vehicle of excellent moral character. Willa was heading to an early shift. Graham waited beside his own truck at the edge of the yard. They had planned breakfast after work. He did not approach until Willa finished speaking with Mac. Rook followed her through the snow. At the edge of the driveway, Willa knelt and placed both hands against the silvered sides of his muzzle. "You're not being left," she whispered. Rook leaned into her. "I'm going to work. I'll be back Thursday." She pressed her forehead against his. Then she stood, climbed into the pickup, and started the engine. Rook watched the truck move down the white road. His upright ear remained forward until the vehicle disappeared between the pines. Graham waited without calling Willa back or interrupting the goodbye. When the road was empty, Rook turned. He walked toward Mac with the unhurried stiffness of an aging dog, circled once near the porch, and lowered himself beside the old man's scuffed boots. Mac gave no command. He only rested one bare hand on Rook's shoulder. That afternoon, Mac and Lenny loaded cut lumber into the truck for Boone Agricultural Repair. They were building a roof over the outdoor section where Willa worked on large equipment. Lenny drove. Mac had finally agreed to let him. Rook sat in the extended cab, head resting near the window. Sunlight moved across the dark fur of his back as they followed the road toward Clear Haven. Months earlier, Mac had used the same road to carry objects no one wanted. He had believed repair was only a way to keep his hands occupied, a defense against memory, a practical use for things already judged too old, too damaged, or too inconvenient to keep. Now he understood that repair was not the same as returning something to what it had been. The hand plane on his bench would always carry a crack beneath the new handle. The generator Willa repaired still coughed in cold weather. Graham could not recover the years he had spent away. Willa would not return to the person she had been before fear taught her to apologize. Rook's scars would remain beneath his coat. Mac would still wake some nights in places that no longer existed. None of that made them useless. Repair meant building a life that accounted for the damage instead of pretending it had never occurred. The truck passed the old forest turn where Mac had first seen two shapes in the snow. No one waited there now. Only sunlight, white road, and tracks crossing between the trees. Rook sighed and closed his eyes. For the first time, he slept in a moving vehicle without keeping his head raised. Some homes were not made by blood, ownership, or promises that no one could guarantee. They were built each morning when one person opened a door, another was free to leave through it, and an old dog no longer believed love required him to guard the way out. Sometimes healing does not mean returning to who we were before the pain. It means learning to live gently with the scars, to open the door again, and to believe that love can still find us without erasing those we have lost. Perhaps grace is not always a grand miracle. Sometimes it is a warm room, a second chance, or an old dog finally sleeping without guarding the door. If this story touched something in your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope. May God bring peace to every tired heart still learning how to feel safe again.